in relationships, both personally and professionally. She has spent 20 years in clinical practice after receiving her BS in biochemistry at the University of Georgia and graduating with honors at Mary Medical College in Nashville. She's also taught courses on health, nutrition, and disease progression, and now shares her insight on stages worldwide, teaching people how to thrive. And finally, Dr. Saundra is also the author of the outstanding new book, Sacred Rest: Recover Your Life, Renew Your Energy, Restore Your Sanity, which reveals the 7 different types of rest and is a truly unique and life-changing must-read, especially if you feel fatigued in any way or you feel like you are not thriving in life as you should be. So, hello, Dr. Saundra, and welcome to Younger, Longer.
Hi, Brian. Thanks for having me.
All right, Dr. Saundra, I first really want to congratulate you on a powerful and important book that everyone listening will greatly benefit from reading, Sacred Rest. It really is such a life changer. And I am sure in answer to the big question I have for you here today in Younger, Longer, we'll be visiting some of the golden keys. To give everyone a little taste, here's one of so many great quotes from Sacred Rest. All rest is not created equal. Much of what we consider rest fails to work because it is not restful. Okay, so interestingly, as noted in the book, vacations may not be the ideal form of rest in many cases, though many people consider them as such. However, they can be a great source of joy, which is also essential for a long life and a great quality of life. So, toward that end, I like to put my conversations with top experts like yourself in imagined scenarios instead of just two people chatting in front of microphones here. And for this ultimate healthy aging and longevity summit, I am putting each conversation in each expert's ultimate favorite travel destination. Now, you told me yours. It's a place I haven't visited but would love to, and that is Maui, Hawaii, and specifically the 64-mile stretch on the coast of the island called the Road to Hana. So, real briefly, would you mind sharing a bit about why that place is magical to you?
Yes, well, it's one of my favorite locations. And I think because of the mystery that you have, just starting off when you first get there, for myself and my husband, when we did this adventure together on our honeymoon, we started off at the very beginning. We got our maps out, we had a picnic lunch packed, and our goal was to go all the way to the end. And we specifically had a few stops along the way that we wanted to visit. We're both huge waterfall fanatics. And so we love hiking and being able to see different waterfalls and different beautiful outlooks. And this one road was just filled with them. I would say there was probably at least 5 or 6 stops that were literally breathtaking. It was so incredibly beautiful.
Hmm. Well, I don't know if this is going to be as fun as your honeymoon, but it does sound like paradise, and I truly must get there someday. For now, though, I will have to imagine it. So, Dr. Saundra, let's say we are driving together on that road to Hana in Maui. We just passed those stunning twin waterfalls. Speaking of waterfalls, called Twin Falls. I've only been there in pictures, and they look amazing. And it's the perfect time to ask you a big question I've been meaning to ask you. So I say, hey, Dr. Saundra, from your unique area of expertise, what are 3 of the simple and most effective steps people can take to look and feel their best, avoid and possibly even overcome disease and live longer and better? What would your first answer be?
Well, that would be simple for me. It's really just determining what type of rest deficit you're experiencing. Or an easier way of saying that would be, what type of fatigue are you experiencing?
And that is going to be a new concept, I think, for many people listening here, because I guess in general, fatigue feels like fatigue, right? So can you explain what you mean? Maybe what are the 7 types and what do you mean by that?
Well, that's the thing. I think for most people, when we ask, how are you doing? We tend to say, I'm tired or I'm drained, but we're not very specific about what area of our life is tired or drained. And the term that I discuss, and the term that really best describes it, is a rest deficit. It's basically when you have gotten a portion of your life, one of these 7 areas. And as you mentioned, those 7 areas are physical, mental, spiritual, emotional, social, sensory, and creative. If one of those areas is being excessively used, you're using more energy in one over the other. Really, it depends on what type of work you're doing. So, someone who may be doing a lot of innovative, creative, kind of out of the box thinking, maybe they're in marketing or something, maybe using more creative and social energy, interacting with people. Someone who's a teacher or a counselor, maybe using more kind of social and emotional type energy, just dealing with people. Someone who maybe is an accountant, maybe using more mental energy. So we're all using different type of energy pulls, and we don't really think about, am I restoring or getting rest in those specific areas where I'm pouring out? And that's where the rest deficit comes. And the really the issue with that is, for many of us, we're just trying to sleep to cure our fatigue. Well, that's really focusing more on the physical, and it's not really purposely improving the area of the rest deficit.
Well, that's a great start. And thank you, Dr. Saundra. So, again, everyone, the 7 different areas of rest and rest deficit are physical, mental, spiritual, emotional, social, sensory, and creative. And we have many people listening today who are in their 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, and beyond. And while the rest deficit can run the gamut on all these different 7 types, I would fathom to say that emotional rest deficit is one of the most prevalent. I've heard a lot of people describe symptoms, so to speak, of what you, Dr. Saundra, have termed emotional rest deficit. So, if you don't mind, would you take us on a deeper dive of the emotional for starters?
Absolutely. Well, I think for many people, they're experiencing an emotional rest deficit without really, as you stated, knowing what that means. I think automatically the mind, when we hear emotions, we start thinking, well, I'm not maybe depressed or anxious, so I must not have that. Well, this is the thing. Most people who have any type of professional personas, or they have a certain way that they want to present themselves to the world, there's a level of stress and fatigue that goes with that. And there's a level of just natural inauthenticity associated with it. And what emotional rest looks like is getting to a place or having those times in your life where you truly feel like you can just be fully authentic. You can state what you're feeling without having to cover it up or having to feel like you need to adjust it in any way so that it's easier for other people to accept. However, when you are in a situation where maybe you're the head of the company, or you are the boss, or you are the person that everyone's looking up to, you're the leader, that level of professional stress that goes with that and that level of inauthenticity causes a fatigue in our emotional reservoir. And unfortunately, oftentimes leaders do not have a lot of people in their lives where they are feeling they can just be emotionally bare and to share those deeper emotions. The problem with that is it creates this sense that there is something kind of terminally wrong with being able to fully be who I am. And that's why it's so important for everyone, regardless of their natural tendency to share themselves, to have someone in their life where they feel like they can be truly authentic, whether that's a coach or a counselor or a mentor or a therapist. But there has to be someone, because otherwise, that's when you build up that emotional toxicity and you get more emotional rest deficit symptoms.
Thank you for explaining that, Dr. Saundra. And for each of the specific areas of rest, the physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, social, sensory, and creative, you define specific signs that could indicate deficit to watch for. For example, with emotional rest, some of those key signs are that you tend to focus on your flaws and failures. You beat yourself up when you make even small mistakes. You excessively worry. You often compensate for who you are with apologies or clarifications. I am certain many people listening can identify with one or more of those, and awareness is key. It's so key to understand in which areas you may need to rest, because otherwise you may be using the wrong tool, so to speak, to try to fix the problem. For example, a lot of people may indeed hear rest deficit and believe that more or better sleep is the fix, but that is not necessarily the case. In the case of emotional rest deficit, which can deplete you and frankly lead to physical health issues, the rest may instead come in the form of making a conscious effort to take it easy on yourself. And yes, as you noted, Dr. Sandra, to enlist the help of someone to help you take it easy on yourself. If you're not able to do that, at least watch yourself closely around different people, for example, and see if you feel inadequate or insecure, and ask yourself if that is really true. Watch yourself closely over a period of time to see if you're trying to please others, and ask yourself why and if that's really your job. This process of watching yourself, kind of like a fly on the wall, can be quite beneficial in helping you ease up on yourself, get the emotional rest your being needs. Now, another area of rest, Dr. Sandra, where I think many people listening today have a true deficit is sensory rest. Can you please share a bit of useful insight on that one?
Yes, I think many of us experience chronic sensory overload. We're bombarded really with our gadgets and with our use of electronics and the computer screens, bright lights, all the different sounds that we have throughout our day. And we're not really aware of how that is affecting us on an ongoing level. For many people, we have this sensory overload that leads to that sensory rest deficit, that feeling as if you're just chronically on. Our notifications are not really helping with that. You know, many of us have our notifications very high on our computers and on our phones. So we're getting that kind of constant release of cortisol level every time we have that little bit of that jolt from that notification going off. The problem with that is what happens when you experience sensory overload is it starts affecting the other parts of your life. So you start having that little bit of fight and flight response kick in. Those cortisol levels start going up, which then adds to the inflammation within the body. And so it creates kind of this snowball effect that we're not aware of. And we continue to use our gadgets excessively without understanding and taking an appreciation of the need for sensory rest, turning everything off at times. That doesn't mean all day, no gadgets. It just means being mindful that your body has to restore from that constant sensory overload and having some times of silence, not listening to the TV. If you know one's watching it, don't have it on. Turning the settings to your phone and your computer down so that you're only getting the most important messages. You're not getting every social media post or every email that comes through lights up on your screen. You're allowing yourself to have some time in between there for the necessity of just quiet.
Yes, Dr. Sandra, making a conscious effort to shut down the screens, the noise, the many forms of sensory input that seem to be coming at us from every direction with the electronics today is certainly mission critical for our health and well-being. I am certain so many of us can use far more of this total sensory rest today.
Absolutely. And that's the thing when you rest, because when people think about rest, I think most of the time our mind automatically goes to the cessation of activity. We think about stopping. And really, rest is about pouring back in what you're pouring out. It's a restorative process of improving yourself. And so it's not that you are taking anything away, but your rest actually allows you to build yourself back up so that you can do whatever it is that you love doing and that you're trying to do more efficiently and more effectively.
Mm, so well put. Let me, if you don't mind, get just a touch personal. In which of these areas have you seen or did you see the most challenge yourself? Maybe a little bit of personal story in that regard.
Absolutely. Well, honestly, this entire process for me started out after 20 years in practice and doing media with different things related to my career. I burned out. I mean, I burned out hard to the point where I thought, wow, if this is what success looks like, I don't want it. It's
Mm,
not worth it.
wow.
And so I needed all seven, is how this kind of came about, this entire process. I wish I could say I just kind of woke up and had this epiphany, but it was a little bit more organic than that. I needed to figure out how to survive the life that I had built that, like you said, looked very great on the outside, book contracts, TV shows and stuff, but felt very horrible to live. And I knew that I was not the only person living like that with a semblance of success that did not have really the benefits of it. And that's what most of us want. We want a life that feels good to live, that's thriving. And so I had a lot of patients at the time as well. And many of them were complaining of being tired all the time too. It was a group effort. I took the research that I was doing kind of on myself, took it back and forth with them. We worked out this practice as far as what are the seven types of breath? Where are the parts of our lives that are falling apart because we refuse to stop long enough to let those places start healing and start investigating what needs to happen to actually kind of build back up what we were tearing down.
Wow. Well, thank you for sharing that. And what a great question you ask. What are the parts of our lives that are falling apart because we won't stop long enough to let those places start healing? That is so key for everyone to consider. So, okay, Dr. Saundra, in our imagined location for this important conversation, we're driving the road to Hana together in Maui, Hawaii. Now, I heard there is a very cool lava tube, a dried out tube of lava that you can walk through along that road. So let's say we just did that. It was fascinating, and now we are back in the car. And it's a great time to ask you for your next most effective step people can take to look and feel their best, avoid and possibly overcome disease, and live longer.
Yes, that would be really to intentionally practice those restorative activities in all those seven areas so that you are restoring the area of your current rest deficit. I think for most people, when I first describe these seven types of rest, their number one thing that comes to mind is, well, which one do I have and what do I do about it once I find out? As I mentioned, this process for me started more personal and working with my own patients. And the thing that we ended up having to do for most of them to be able to intentionally start practicing those activities was to help them first diagnose themselves. That's where some of the questions you mentioned in the book came from. And we actually put together a free assessment online at restquiz.com for them to be able to do so they could quickly be able to say, oh, this is the one. This is the one I have the worst rest deficit in. And so I can intentionally determine what I need to do to restore that one area. And then we started looking at what are the restorative activities because, as I mentioned, most of us, we hear rest and we think laying on the sofa watching Netflix. We think just stopping or going on vacation or something that kind of breaks us away from our day. And that's just not realistic for most of us. We can do those things periodically, but we need something that we can do on an ongoing level. And so that would be my number one thing, to really focus in on what restores you.
Well, I appreciate that. And on that front, would you mind giving a couple examples of restorative activities? Perhaps in another area I think a lot of people listening will identify with right now, and that is a deficit of mental rest. Now, briefly, for everyone listening, some key signs of mental rest deficit are that you experience feelings of irritation or frustration when thinking about your day. You feel you can't possibly keep up with your to-do list. You feel like you're in a brain fog during the day, and or you get edgy with people around you over the smallest things. So, Dr. Saundra, let's say I have taken your first most effective step and identified that mental rest is something I definitely need more of. What is one highly effective way to get proper mental rest?
Yes, I love that one because I think many people experience it, especially if you're someone who's ever went to the grocery store with that list of three things and you get in there and you're like, what's that third thing? And you can't seem to remember it. You passed all the dementia tests, so it's like there's nothing medically that's a reason for it. Oftentimes it's because of that mental rest deficit. And so something very simple, it really just depends on the type of mental rest deficit you're experiencing. So if you're someone who lays down to go to sleep at night and your headspace just won't quiet down, you're having those ruminating thoughts, or you're running through your checklist for the next day, or having those kind of what I call self-defeating thoughts that just keep popping up, then something that can be helpful is actually just having, or what some people call brain dumping, or just having a notepad or you could use a journal if that's your thing, but really just a piece of paper to write down whatever those thoughts are, whatever it is that your mind won't let you release. Because the way the brain tends to work is if you're ruminating over a thought, it will try to hold on to that thought throughout the night, even at the expense of you resting well. So you can't get into those deeper levels of really restorative non-REM sleep because you're having this ongoing mental rest deficit. So just starting off simple with just a brain dump, writing it down, even if it's like self-defeating type thoughts, trying to process that before going to bed is not beneficial. So you can write it down, whatever it is, you have it in a concrete place so the brain can then let it go so you can actually get some sleep. And then you still have that information to review the next morning if you want to look at whatever the to do list was that you were trying to remember or to process those emotions that you were having a hard time getting past that night.
Such a great suggestion. I can attest that it works. It's funny because between my wife and I think she might, in the past, have had a challenge with dwelling on past too much, whereas I, running really several organizations. I'm sure you work with a lot of entrepreneurs, so you know where I'm coming from, but running various organizations and trying to help people like you do with different speaking events and so forth. I'm always trying to catch myself because I'm too much in the future and instead just to be present. So lay down at night, I'm much better now with this. And one of the key reasons is the suggestion you just offered, but my mind would always race to, hey, what about this? What about that? I've got to do this. What if I did that? All these thoughts, and it made for horrible rest. It made for horrible sleep in that case too. And in my case, it's exactly what I do. I will sit there, I will grab a folder that I keep nearby and just dump it all out. I'll get it out and I'll literally close it. Even the act of closing that messy folder, I'm done. I put it away, and it changed a lot, just that one act. So wonderful.
I love that. Another one that may be helpful for people, you mentioned about being present. That's very hard for a lot of us because our head's so far in the future, kind of thinking about what we want to do. I know, we talked about vacations. I don't have anything against vacations. I just don't think they have a tendency to be very restful in how most of us do them. But that's one time that I find that people sometimes have trouble being present because they're there, but they're thinking about work and they're there with family. And so something that could be helpful is just having a focal thought that you bring your mind back to. So rather than being present with your family, but your head's kind of thinking about the 20 meetings going on that you're not there for, or things are happening that you want to kind of keep up with, have one word that you're going to bring your mental processes back to. And I always say, make that one word be something related to what it is you're trying to focus on. So if that could be family, or it could be relationship, or it could be love, you get to pick the word. But whenever your mind tries to kind of go rattling off into whatever direction, I kind of look at the mind like this unruly child. You have a 5-year-old and you tell it to sit in the chair, it's going to jump and bounce off the walls till it gets tired. And you don't want your brain to exhaust out. So you have that word chair that you're going to bring your mind back to and keep it in that place of being really intentional about thinking about whatever it is you're wanting to focus on. So that word for me might be family. If I'm at the beach trying to enjoy my time, but my thoughts are going to all the different projects I'm working on, that's the word that I keep bringing it back to.
That's powerful. So it's an anchor. Yeah, an anchor that takes you right back. Let me address another one that I think certainly needs addressing, one of the areas of rest, and maybe any suggestion on that front. So spiritual. I think in today's world, now we've got folks listening who are certainly many Christians. I'm sure we have Jewish people listening as well, and Buddhists, and those who call themselves spiritual but not religious, and anything else in between. And I know you come from a strong Christian faith and background. I think that's wonderful. I don't think we need to hide our spirituality. And I think a lot of folks, no matter what your beliefs or specific beliefs may be, are probably going to benefit from getting some spiritual rest. Can you address that? Maybe a restorative activity or two on that front too?
Absolutely. And I love how you put that because you're right. I actually state in the book for me not to share my spiritual belief would be inauthentic, which would be a form of rest deficit. So I made a point of making that very clear. But I love that because spiritual rest isn't just simply about one thing. It's a concept. And I think regardless of your spiritual beliefs, that all of us kind of believe that or need to feel at least that we belong, that we're part of a larger community, that we are interconnected in some way. And I think that is at the very core that many people have to experience, really, to have a place of spiritual rest within their lives. I think that feeling that you are just, that you don't belong to something bigger or that you're not actively contributing to the world has a sense of making us feel as if we're not important and that our life doesn't matter. And that is its own level of toxicity. And so that's really just at the core of it, getting that sense of feeling that what you contribute is important. And then making some time for that, making room for that in your life. Having, if you are someone of faith, having those times where you are spending time doing those activities and doing it knowing that it does have a purpose for restoring and to rebuild you.
Thank you, Dr. Saundra. And I know in your wonderful book, you brought forth some key studies regarding the health benefits of prayer, of meditation, call it what you will from whatever belief background you come from. But it's a very powerful thing. And would you mind addressing that just a bit more?
Yes, one of the studies that I thought was just amazing was talking about the effect of prayer and how that helps us to be really grounded and centered. And I think the thing that really just impressed me was when it was referring to those of faith when they pray, it actually kind of has the same patterns on the brain as having a conversation with someone face to face. And if you're someone of faith, then you can understand just how significant that is to feel that you are seen by God or however you term that, and that you are important enough and vital enough to the process to be in a face to face type relationship.
Wow, very important. To repeat, everyone, it has the same patterns on the brain as having a conversation with someone face to face. And if you believe in God or however you term a presence beyond or greater than yourself, those are some very important and good conversations you are having indeed. And it hits on this need for social connection, which is so key to health and longevity. And in this case, that is quite the social connection. It makes sense. And I'm grateful that you are this widely known and regarded MD, Dr. Sandra, and you are discussing this outright, including in your book. Religion and people's spiritual beliefs, whether they are Christian, Jewish, Islamic, Buddhist, or even if they have no name for their beliefs, are so core to health and longevity. But it seems to have gotten all twisted up and dragged down in politics. And so we're losing the ability to have a healthy conversation about it when we should not be losing that. So, first of all, thank you.
Yes, and I agree. I think that was the only type of rest that it was kind of like, okay, how deep do I go into this?
Mhm.
Because all of the rest of it is so scientific and there's science related to even the spiritual. But as you mentioned, I actually divide the book up into two sections because I felt like that spiritual component had a huge part of it, especially in my own life. But I also wanted to respect the fact that I know not everyone who really needed to get the teaching of those seven types of rest would be as open to that. So that's part of the reason I kind of broke the book up into those two sections. So to respect people and to be able to give them the option of which direction they wanted to go with that.
Yeah. And it was, again, really well done. The book is Sacred Rest, everybody. And I just can't recommend it highly enough, no matter what your background or what your beliefs. The science is there, and you pull out some of the key of key studies to support each of these, by the way, which I also love. I'm a big research geek, like I mentioned. All right. So I could tell that I could talk to you all day, but We are in our imagined scenario for this fascinating conversation, Dr. Saundra. We're on that road to Hana in Maui, Hawaii. I hear that there's a certified organic sanctuary there called La Lima Farm, I think it's called. And man, just hearing about that alone, I was like, wow, now I really have to get there. It's 13 or 14 acres of really lush, overflowing with organic fruits and vegetables and herbs. And it sounds like my kind of place just to kick back.
And they make smoothies.
Oh, see, there you go. Sold. Booking a trip. So right now, though, I'm only imagining we're there, you and I, and we just left that place, let's just say, and we're back driving in the car, and we've got, sticky, wonderful, sweet fruit juices flowing down our hands from having smoothies and fruits and stuff like that. And ideal time to ask you one more. What would your next most effective step to live long and well be?
It would be to develop some simple ways to rest well, really in the middle of your busy day to help control those negative effects of stress that we all are confronted with. I think the hardest part for most people when they hear about the 7 types of rest and they've identified what type of rest they need, then it's like, oh my goodness, I got something else I've got to add to my already maxed out to-do list. And that is not the case. Really, it's looking at what you're already doing and how to adjust it to be more restful. I'll give a simple example for someone who may be experiencing episodes where they're having eye strain or, some sensory rest deficit related to staring at their screens all day. Part of a very simple recovery plan could include just doing some flow break cycles throughout their day. Having time where, yes, you flow and you do your work and you go deep and you use all your mental processes. And then you just take a 5-minute break to go get some water. You need it anyway. Most of us are not getting enough. And so just that process of getting up, you're looking away from the screen, you're walking, which walking is part of the active physical rest. You're moving your body, the circulation, the lymphatics get improved and not being sedentary all day. You're getting the fluids. And then if you have, even in that 5 minutes, if you walk by a window and you're looking outside and you're seeing nature and you're having a second to appreciate that, you're getting the creative rest. So you haven't had to make this huge life change. You've just incorporated something that's going to actually help you restore in the middle of that busy day. And it didn't take a lot of effort. And overall, when you come back to that screen and you sit back down to do that work, you will feel better because now your neck muscles have had a moment to relax. Your facial muscles, your eye muscles have all had a moment to relax because they have not been staring at the same thing for 5-6 hours straight.
Yes, that particular example of a way to get sensory rest is more important to health and well-being than many people realize. This lack of sensory rest, the constant input of information and bleeps, dings, and other sounds that is so common today can literally and physically wear people down and take an enormous toll on people's physical health. You mentioned making sure to take mini breaks away from phones, computer, and other screens and noise. And another along those lines is to also be certain to take longer sabbaticals from all the sensory input. Maybe you set aside a certain half a day, maybe an entire day, such as Sunday, where you keep the sensory input from phones and such to a minimum, if not banning it outright. So, okay, Dr. Saundra, this is also important. Let's dive into another area of rest where so many people are deficient today, and that is physical rest. Now, upon hearing this, people may think that pertains especially to people who work all day on their feet and such, or athletes, but that is not necessarily the case. So many of us are physical rest deficient and don't even know it. And it can happen, for example, and is quite common among people who do sit a lot too, such as at a desk. We are in the same positions for so long, which can take a serious physical toll on our bodies, and we don't even realize it till later. Now, I'll use myself as an example because I'm happy to say that what I've trained myself to do follows suit with what you advise. Because I sit a lot in front of the computer doing what I do here, I've gotten myself in the habit of frequently standing up and doing what I call a body scan, where it's like I imagine this blue halo of light starting at the top of my head, and I just slowly bring it all the way down my body while asking myself, where am I feeling stress? For me, if that blue halo turns red, if I do detect stress, it's typically around my neck and shoulders, which I'm sure a lot of people can relate to. In which case, I'll do some stretches, maybe adjust my monitor and move things around to be in a different position. And if you aren't aware of those small stressors, those small pains, and do something about them, they sneakily build into bigger pains and more serious health issues. Now, if you're all caught up in your work at the desk or reading a book in a chair or such, it's not always easy to routinely make yourself aware to do this. Meanwhile, some people are aware but just ignore it. So, in my case, one thing a cell phone is great for is you can set little alarms to remind you. I did that initially, and eventually it became a habit without the alarms. Anyway, this physical rest is so important. So, Dr. Sandra, maybe expand a bit more on the physical rest that's probably deficient in a whole lot of people listening, and perhaps add a few other key tips, maybe?
Absolutely. Well, I think you're absolutely right because that's the thing. Many of us, we just kind of keep pushing through. We've accepted that I'm going to hurt at the end of a workday. My shoulders are going to hurt. My eyes are going to be strained. My legs are going to be swollen. And all of those are part of a physical rest deficit. It's a sedentary effect that happens because we are not keeping our lymphatics and our circulatory systems properly functioning throughout the day. We're not being mindful of our body ergonomics and making some small adjustments. And the thing is, because we are trying to kind of ignore the symptoms that our body's saying, we just kind of push through and, accept it as the norm. For a lot of people, by the end of their 8-hour shift or 8-hour day, or even if they're not even working, if they're just sitting kind of in the same chair for long periods of day, what ends up happening is we start getting places in our body that we are breaking down every day without even taking the time to try to restore them back up. And so with rest, we have two components. We have the active physical rest and passive physical rest. Passive is the sleeping and the napping, and we all know we need the sleeping, and sometimes naps are helpful too. But the active physical rest is just as important. And for some people, that kind of sounds like active physical rest. Rest is restoration. That is at the key of what rest does. It's restoring something. It's the same reasons athletes rest. It's for restoration. And so when athletes rest, that restoration can include stretching. It can include massage. It can include rolling on a tennis ball and trying to get circulation back in areas. It includes leisure walks for normal people who aren't trying to do marathons, just keeping the circulation moving, getting up from your chair after being there for maybe 2 hours and doing that short walk around your house to the kitchen or wherever, taking the dog out or something. We have to be mindful of how our body is speaking to us and stop really telling it to shut up when it's trying to warn us of areas that need to be restored.
Well, that is so well put. Our bodies are constantly talking to us, but today so many do have a tendency not to listen to it or to hear it and ignore it. But it does tell us where we need to focus our attention so little pains and stressors don't turn into big ones. And here I know it is so key to find ways to remind yourself to pay attention and listen to your body. I mentioned setting alarms on your phone, for example. If you have pets around, this is an unusual one, but true. You can simply watch them to see how often they're paying attention to their body. They do a lot of stretching, especially cats. Train yourself to see that and trigger your own body awareness. Or just use good old post it notes. Post bright reminders to yourself everywhere to do a body scan. Become aware of what your body is trying to tell you.
Yes, I love that. For myself, I tend to just do every even hour that I'm awake. Every even hour that I'm awake, I kind of do a quick, as you stated, kind of body scan. And I ask, what's hurting you today right now? What can I feel? Because honestly, you shouldn't feel anything as far as your body. Nothing should just kind of say, hey, I'm here.
Mhm.
As you're going throughout your day, you really shouldn't have any part of your body that's waving at you saying, pay attention, something's going on here. And when you feel that, just stop for a moment and see what can you do to release it. If it's, maybe you need to move your computer screen a little bit. Maybe if you have two screens, you're looking to one side for too long, or like you stated, your posture may be off a little bit, but make that little adjustment now rather than waiting until it's 5 p.m. And you can barely get out of the chair because everything's stiffened up.
And by the way, complete side note, you just put that so eloquently, more eloquently than I did. And I also have to say this, just pure compliment to you. You're a really good writer. As I was reading your book, I'm like, ooh, what a great quote. What a great quote. I opened up with one of them. And listen, I've read so many health books and listened to so many, and there are some powerful ideas out there that are not always presented in the most enjoyable way. Sometimes they're stiff, to be honest, talking about stiff. But in your case, such eloquent writing. So it made it a joy to read that book and hearing you right now too. Speaking of which, let me hit one more here because it's been good socializing with you. We do have to end in a moment, but I don't want to leave without addressing another area, at least briefly, any insight you could share, and that's social. Again, we have middle age and we also have people who are beyond middle age. And so this might be particularly important as folks hit their middle years and their golden years to pay attention to this one. What do you think of that?
Absolutely. The thing with social rest is most of us, we don't really think about how relationships pull on us. So the way we look at social rest is, are you spending most of your time in relationships that are negatively pulling on you? In other words, they're people who need things from you. And it doesn't mean they're negative people. They could be your kids, it could be your spouse, it could be your clients, it could be coworkers, but people who are always needing things from you. And a lot of the studies show that many adults have fewer adult friends than ever because our time has been spent with just those people who need us. Work, family. That's a cutoff for a lot of people with their relationships. And so we have pulled away from those people who are just simply life giving, who are fun to be around, who energizes, who have great energy. And that's important. Unfortunately, with social media, we have a lot of social interaction, but not a lot of social rest, not a lot of opportunities to be around people who really are life giving and are pouring back into our lives. And that's important. And I feel like as we get older and we maybe have a little bit more time in our lives and room in our lives to get back to the appreciation of that, of those relationships that make us feel better. For people don't always need something from you, you just enjoy each other.
So powerful, so important. It's really good medicine.
It is.
I love your strong focus on this. It's so key, everyone, to take an inventory of the social relationships in your life. It's as key as paying close attention to your diet. First of all, do you have enough positive social relationships in the first place? If not, there are ways to make them happen. And it's so key to your health and longevity to prioritize that. There are clubs and volunteer possibilities. And if mobility is an issue, one great positive about the internet is there are many positive social groups online. If you're on Facebook, for example, be sure to search for The Art of Anti-Aging and join the free group there, a very positive group where people support one another. But jumping back, when you do that litmus test on your social relationships, it's important to assess if you have positive ones. There may be relationships in your life that are necessities, such as taking care of elder parents or children or grandchildren, but that doesn't necessarily mean those are positive. You need engagement also with people who are good for you. And you can ask yourself after being with that person, does this person charge my batteries? Do I feel better now? What are your thoughts on that, Dr. Saundra?
Well, I think when you are a caregiver in any form, whether it's a spouse or family member that you're caring for, then you understand the responsibility of that and you love this person, so you want to give of yourself. But that is when it is even more important for you to have those socially restful relationships because that person is pulling from you relationally and they are requiring things from you to be able to be that caregiver. It's the same, kind of the old adage that when you're on the plane and the plane's going down, you put your seatbelt on first and then you put it on the person that you love, that you're with. Well, that's really what self-care has to look like. You have to look at it a little bit in a different way when you're a caregiver because it is so vitally important for you to continue to remain strong to do these restorative activities and to be mindful of your own personal rest deficits so you can continue to give out of your best self. I really feel most of us spend the majority of our time pouring out into the lives of others from our own emptiness. We're drained, we're tired, we're kind of doing the best we can, but we're giving out of our own exhaustion and fatigue. And really, what we want to thrive and not always feel like we're striving is to get to a place where we're actually pouring out of our fullness, where we're staying restored. We're doing the restorative practices on a regular basis in the middle of our busy day so that we can continue to do our work at our best level, most effectively and efficiently.
Beautifully put. Find people that charge you, that recharge you. Hang out with those people in any way you can. Like you, Dr. Saundra, in this conversation, you've been a positive charge here. And listen, our imagined Road to Hana Drive is unfortunately done. I would love to prolong it for two reasons, because we're imagining this is Hawaii, for goodness sake. And number two, again, you've been marvelous to talk to learn from here. I am so grateful for that life-changing journey you just took us on. And to everyone listening, so many people today feel fatigued, whether you're 38 or 88, life can feel overwhelming. It is so crucial to understand that fatigue, as Dr. Saundra Dalton-Smith has shared here, to start by becoming aware of what type of rest deficit you are actually experiencing. Again, physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, social, sensory, creative. You really can't address a problem until you first understand the source of it. And then when you do, you could take steps such as those that Dr. Saundra has shared to address it. So first, I do ask you to order the Empowerment Package. That's the complete recordings and transcripts of this summit, so you can hear and read all these most effective steps that Dr. Saundra has shared and that all the top doctors and researchers are sharing here in Younger, Longer. So you can hear it again and again and wherever and whenever you choose. And I do really, really strongly encourage you to grab yourself a copy of Dr. Saundra Dalton-Smith's unique and oh so important book, Sacred Rest, to go deeper into making sure you get that restorative rest you need. At the bottom of my heart, I want to say thank you for sharing your powerful wisdom with us here today in Younger, Longer, the Insiders Health Summit.
Thank you so much, Brian. This is a fun part where we get to go jump into the waterfall.
Yay, let's do it.